And so on behalf of the rest of the volunteers and the board of the Sister Bay Historical Society, welcome to this second in our series, our summer series of Sister Bay stories. With that, let's get to Dick Burress. So these may be the last honest words you hear. So many of you know Dick, who has been for a long time with the Emergency Services Group and retired as the Director of Emergency Services after having been with the organization for over 30 years and Director for over 20 years. So a lot of you know Dick from that. A lot of you also know Dick just because he is a area volunteer who's always willing to lend a hand to our church and to other organizations and individuals in the community. So Dick is known as well for his big heart. We thank him for that. We are fortunate to have landed Dick as a tour guide now, also for the museum grounds. So if you'd like a tour with a lot of local color, come on Fridays. And so we're also happy and pleased that Dick has agreed to put on this program tonight with him and selected friends that you are about to see. So with that, please welcome Dick Burress.
Thank you very much, Terry. Well, I think he's probably correct. There may be some stretch tonight, but so about the evening, I'm going to start with about a 10-minute presentation on my immediate family. That was the first request, and then as we talked, it made sense to bring in some people. So you're going to hear a little bit about me growing up with Sister Bay and my immediate family, and then I'm going to introduce three friends that are really lifelong friends, and we're going to share some memories and hopefully answer some questions if there are some, or rebuttal or whatever. I just want to make this one disclaimer, and that is after 50 years, memories sometimes fade a bit, sometimes jade a bit. So these are my memories, and we'll talk about them, and there's no arguing here because it's just what happened. After this initial presentation on my family, I would like to say that unlike the other three people who will be up here tonight, my family does not have a long history in Sister Bay. We've never owned a business in Sister Bay. I am second generation, but the people that you will hear tonight have had businesses and have gone back a number of generations, so we're anxious to hear that. A little bit about my family. My mother, Helen, grew up in Sturgeon Bay. My father, Gentry, was from Hayti, Missouri. Both my father had 6 siblings. Dad's father, Joseph, was a staunch Southern Baptist, and at the age of 14, when my father thought that he had had enough of Grandpa's strict rules, he jumped the rails and ran off to Chicago. At 16, he went back home believing that he'd be welcomed back as the prodigal son. Instead, a trip to the woodshed resulted in Gentry leaving and not returning until the death of his father. After moving back to Chicago, he met a woman from Sister Bay, Gert Knudsen, and the two of them eventually married and moved to Sister Bay. They had 2 girls, Carol Ann and Mary Lou. After a period of time, the marriage ended. Gentry then met Helen in Sturgeon Bay at Bunda's store where she worked and he worked part-time. They moved to Sister Bay and had 9 more children. Marion, Betty, Susie, Jeannie, Joe, Dick, Tori, Katie, Marcia. I'll say it one more time. Marion, Betty, Susie, Jeannie, Joe, Dick, Tori, Katie, Marcia. Gentry and Helen first moved into a small home on Larson Court in Sister Bay, an area that was called Skunk Hollow by the locals, or it was called Fertile Valley by those who were more observant. Jeff Benson told me only that at one time there were more than 18 children under the age of 6 in a small area of Sister Bay down by Lyson Court. They lived in that home for about 6 years. Gentry and Helen's second home was on North Spring Road, and that's where I was born. Our neighbor to the north on North Spring Road, our neighbors were the Sunstroms. More about that family later. When I was about 5, maybe 4, we moved to a house on Highway 57. Most of you probably knew as the domicile gift shop. There, my father and mother remained until all 9 of their children grew up and left home. My mother was left alone in the house in 1979 after my father died, at which time they sold their home and moved in, and she sold the home and moved into an apartment. Now, I have some memory of my life on Spring Road, but very few. I was pretty young. The house had 1 bedroom with 4 beds in it. The fact that my parents had 3 more children while sleeping in a bedroom with 6 children speaks to my father's persistence. We were all very glad to get to a larger home, and that home on Highway 57. Sister Bay at that time was our world. More correctly, an area of about 6 blocks was our world. The patio drive-in bordered us to the south. The Ed and Olive Koessl farm, whose barn we are in tonight, was across the street on Highway 57 and required daily trips to get eggs. To the west was our school, and behind us, orchards and more orchards and orchards. In the evenings and on weekends, kids would start showing up at the school on the courts and on the baseball field, and football, basketball, baseball, whatever, just after dinner. It reminded me of the movie Field of Dreams, as people would be coming up the hill and out of the woods and playing sports. The Bastian brothers, Sunstroms, Fritzes, Manns, Jacobsons, Henriksons, Shampoos, Walkers, Jorgensens. On any given night, there was always enough to play something. And if there was not, we'd play with invisible people. All of this ended when Bill Bastian, from below the bluff, whistled. The first time it was to pick up the stuff and get ready, and the second, it looked like gazelles going over the Serengeti. Everybody would leave. Everybody would head home. At the Burress family, we all sat down together. All of us every night, the 11 of us. Sometimes there was 12 if Fuzzy was. Most of the time there was 10 if I was over at Fuzzy's. I think there was always a kid over there. Mom made the same entree for dinner as long as I can remember. Saturday was hamburgers or sloppy joes. Sunday was chicken. Monday was ring bologna. Tuesday was meatloaf. Wednesday was mac and cheese. Thursday was pork roast. Friday was fish sticks. Well, that was until Vatican II. After Vatican II, when you could eat meat on Friday, we had surf and turf, spam and fish sticks. My father worked at Dundas store and drove our only car to work. It wouldn't matter if he left it at home because Mom didn't drive until my brother Joe and I taught her to drive once we had our license. Gentry often had his lunch at Emma's across the street or the Sister Bay Bowl, which was generally a liquid lunch. And a little bit of liquid before dinner. Sundays and Wednesdays were church day, and Helen would march all 9 of us down the hill to St. Rosilius. There were 3 churches in town immediately. 4 if you counted the Moravian church, but that was way out there, way. There was the Catholic Church, which is now the Lure. The church, the Baptist Church on Maple Street, or what we called it, the Church of Those Who Do Not Dance. And then there was the Happy Lutheran, or Zion, at the end of town. Church summer school was for 3 weeks and was instructed by nuns. We could spend a whole night talking about that, but I think we'll just move on. Most of my early memories were playing outside with my brothers and sisters. But my first friend was one that I grew up next to on Spring Road, and then just a short walk away. On Maple Drive, I met Gregory Lynn Sunstrom. To describe Fuzzy, I would say that he was capable of getting us in trouble, but even better at getting us out of it. As we grew older, we came to recognize that Fuzzy could fix anything. And if Tom Hanks in Apollo 13 had his way, Fuzzy would have been in the Apollo capsule trying to figure out how to make the rectangular scrubber fix into the circular scrubber, and he would do it in record time. And that was Fuzzy. Fuzzy, can you please stand up and just second to Fuzzy, I probably met Craig Bastian when I was still living on Spring Road. We went to Story Hour with Mrs. Carlson at the library. But I came to know him more when we moved to Highway 57 and we went to school. Following that, it's safe to say that we saw each other almost every day. He was the boy with the flat top buzz and the very calm demeanor. Later in life, he could have played Billy Bean in Moneyball. That was his personality. I always considered a voice of reason when he would often say, "I'll do it, but I'm not sure it's a good idea." Craig, can you stand up, please? In about 1961 or 62, I met a new kid in town, at least to me. One that was not my neighbor and did not go to my grade school. I was at the beach one day when a boy came riding in on his Schwinn Stingray bike with a banana seat and high ride handlebars. He looked very comfortable there. Kind of like Tommy in the movie Shawshank Redemption. Remember Tommy? He rolled in the bus and he looked like Elvis. He was just cool with it all. That was okay. Later, he could have played Chris Chambers in my favorite movie of all time, Stand By Me. Chris was played by River Phoenix. He was always known as a tough guy, but we knew him as the one who always had our back. We also knew him as the one with the huge heart. David Paul Kodanko, could you please stand up? At this time, we have a presentation.
Some slides of some of the familiar businesses and places, restaurants and so forth, some of the haunts that Dick mentioned in Sister Bay in that time frame. So let's hope this goes as well.
talk about here. So guys, can you come on up, please? Join us. Greg William, welcome. David, Paul, welcome. Gregory Lynn, welcome. I wanted to mention that this table was supposed to be 4 people. We were supposed to be 4 people here. Andy Henderson, who was a big part of Sister Bay's lineage, and we grew up with him, of course. Spent 12 years with him in school, but Andy's wife had an injury, and so he bowed out. So we'll talk a little bit about Henderson's Garage. In that presentation that I made about Gentry and Helen and family, anything you didn't know? Was it probably most of it?
I forgot to tell the story about the little hole in the car.
Wow, yeah, that's another. So anyway, what we'd like to do is. The story is simple. We, Gentry and family, that's essentially the one car, and it was often an interesting car. Dad liked to throw cherry bombs. Barrel bombs, you know, he'd drive up behind people and he was a jokester and he talks about what people were jumping. And one day, he threw it out the car, he always had a cigarette in his mouth and came back in and blew up inside the car. So, but I think the story that Fuzzy is actually talking about is 1956 Chrysler, it was a black Chrysler. They were at Husby's one night, favorite aunt, and with Ole Bridenhagen and Enos Larson and a few of the other boys and Robbie Kodanko, and they decided to, the tourist asked about hunting season when it was, and they said, well, really any time at all. So they climbed in the car that night and they set the rifle down on the transmission housing and blew a hole in the ceiling. And the tourists got out of the car and they never saw him again. So, as I said at the beginning, we didn't really have a business. We didn't have a lot of history here. So, Craig, I would like you to start and just talk a little bit about the Bastian history. Your father, maybe your grandparents, and some of that people will not know.
My grandfather, okay, my family, my father's family grew up in West Bend. They moved up here, probably around the late 30s. And my grandfather bought the Country House Motel, which is still there. At that time, it was a kind of a supper club, and then it morphed into a nursing home, and then it got sold, and it is now the resort that it is. My mom's parents were, my mom's dad was the postmaster, Sister Bay. And that's kind of pretty much it.
Before you move that mic, though, what I thought was interesting, and if we could talk about it for just a minute, is because you lived at the Village View Motel, but it wasn't the only business there. You talked about
when I grew up, my parents had the Village View Motel, and in front of the building we had Wes's Barber Shop and Irene's Beauty Shop.
Irene. Yeah. Irene Oldenburg.
Irene Oldenburg. And what was interesting is upstairs in that building we had 2 rental apartments. One of them was no longer rented. The other we had an old lady that rented it. But anyway, the only bathroom that was access to the barber shop and the beauty shop was upstairs. And I remember on many occasions a patron of one or the other would have to go through our house to our private bathroom because they weren't able to climb up the stairs. So it was an interesting thing.
And the other beauty shop in town was Georgie's, Georgie Stavers, just down the road. But I think Wes was the only barber at that time.
Yeah, he was.
David Kodanko has a history with his father, Jake. David, you want to talk to us about your father's business and his past maybe a little bit?
Certainly. My father's name was Jacob Kodanko. Mother's name was Anna Lundquist. My mother was from Rock Island, and Dad was from Sister Bay. Dad had three brothers, there were four all total, and grandparents came from Hungary, and my grandfather was from Hungary, and grandmother was from, I believe, Sister Beck. Am I quoting here? Okay, I'm sorry. And my father's father passed away when he was 14 years old, and so Dad had to quit school and go to work and try to help to keep the family together. And at 18, Dad went sailing, and sailed for 14 years. And when he finished, he had captain's papers on all waters, and he had seen the entire planet. And really enjoyed his time then. And I'm sorry. And my father decided in 1954 to retire from sailing and move back home to buy an excavation business in town. And he actually got off of the boat in New York and had a lady friend there. My mother's name was Annabelle, and they adopted me in New York. He quit the sea, bought a business, got married, and adopted a son on, I think, probably the same weekend. County. So he had a prosperous excavation business in town and was in business for, I want to still 54 to, I think it was 1976, and then sold the business, and he retired early. So that's my story.
Thank you. Would you pass it over to Leslie? Yeah, Gregory Lynn.
Can you hear me? Well, our family goes way back over here. If you start off on my father's side, and his mother, it goes to the Jens Jacobson Museum on Washington Island, is our great-grandfather. And then the Sunstroms started out farming just east of town, where Mark Sunstrom's auto body is, where the Sunstrom sign is, and that's where my father was raised. My mother was raised over the next street over, where Musicano had the big horse farm and bought the Thomas house. She came from over in that area, so they both, then they bought the Shady Rest Hotel from Elmer Burns in approximately 57 or 58. And they said we were next door neighbors. We moved first. They moved and we were blocked apart from each other. So that's what we were fighting their whole life. Then anyhow, they had a resort, and they were still at the resort. When we purchased we became partners with the Luther family in the Little Sister Resort. So we were there from 1974 till a couple years ago. So 46 years we were at the resort.
How did you meet Susan?
High school sweetheart.
So I introduced these three. Again, Gregory Lynn.
Nobody knows Gregory.
David Paul, Craig William, and that was their God-given and parental given. Where the heck did Fuzzy Corn Dog and Zeb come from? All right. We've got a lot of stuff to cover. We're just going to go through some of it very fast. But, again, we're talking about stuff that was 50 plus years ago, and so we're going to roll through some of it. But I don't think it's a stretch to say, and there are a lot of our friends here who grew up with us, but we spent a big part of our days, summer days, at our beach and at the Sister Bay Park. Is that a lie?
I have a question that was brought up by person a little older than us, but how many people here can say they've played Bibble Babble?
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to pass. There's quite a few that are their hands up. Yeah, Barney was a Bibble Babble king. And what it is, you take a popsicle stick or some wooden stick, you jump off the diving board and put it underwater, and then when it comes up, everybody jumps in at the same time and tries to get it. If you claim, then you get the item the next time. And that's what the game is.
We had an absolute great experience at the park. They always had a park superintendent for us. Andy was one of our superintendents as he grew up. But everybody headed to the park. They also had rakes and shovels for us. We cleaned up the park first. We had our swim lessons down there. We played games, and if it was snowing or raining, or it was snowing in the summer. We go inside the village hall. But at some point in time, we graduated from the diving board of the dock to Bunda's dock. Craig, I would ask you this question. What were the parameters to get on Bunda's dock?
You absolutely, positively had to be one of the cool kids. So I guess we were all pretty cool.
Well, I'm not sure we went there to be cool. I know that that's where the girls like to sunbathe. So I think there was an ulterior motive.
Well, there is that.
A big part of our life also was a festival in the fall festival, and although it's become great under Louise's leadership again, the fall festival was such a big part of our lives back then, because it started way before Friday. It started on Wednesday when the rides would roll in, and we'd watch them. We'd sit on the bluff and we'd watch them roll in, and then we'd get together on Friday night for the Lions auction at the corner of the Sister Bay Bowl with Barney and Belge and the Willems family. And the two auctioneers there were Kodanko and John Trubisky. And they would take turns, and the 2 weeks prior to that, everyone would bring their stuff to the corner of the Sister Bay Bowl, and then Jake and Lon, or not Lon, John would auction off. My father's job was to make certain that the auction item went for enough, because if it didn't, he would outbid everyone and then march the item backward on the bowl and back into the pile. But that was only Friday night. Saturday night, of course, we had the festival and carnival and the parade, and businesses really went all out back then. They were amazing floats, and I remember Chris's Foods always put together a great float in the parade, and we had a great carnival back at the time, and that night culminated with a cakewalk, and it was an actual cakewalk where the women in town all made cakes, beautiful cakes, and you would walk your ticket. It became, understandably so. But you have to understand something about this. The women's club ran the village. The Lions Club was a close second, but you didn't get anything past the village board was just kind of a figurehead, subject to the whims of the Lions Club and mostly the women's club. But on one particular time, and I wanted Andy here to talk about this, but we went on a cakewalk, and we were a little older. I think these guys may have been. I know Andy was there because we won probably a dozen of these beautiful cakes. Took them outside and had just an amazing cake fight. And how disgusting we were. Louise Henderson grabbed me by the ear, and as many of us that she could round up, and scolded us like nobody's business about destroying these beautiful works of art that they were. Then, of course, after the cakewalk on Sunday, and for the few nights after that, there was the great Lions play. which wouldn't be welcome in Florida anymore because all of them dressed up in drag and it's South Pacific and all a whole variety of plays that were really great. So, Craig, one of the other businesses that your father had was a cherry orchard. I don't know if you mentioned that.
I did not.
But I think we all pick cherries. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
My dad had a little cherry orchard at what used to be the Sister Bay ball field up on Highland Road. It's now the apartment buildings, but if you guys remember the old Sister Bay ball field up to what, maybe 10 years ago. And he had a small one across the street, and boy, he sold that probably somewhere in the 70's, and it got to the point where he would take 2 weeks vacation from his job at the lumberyard to do the cherry business, and every year he would just say, I'm never going to do it again. It was a labor of the age for him. So yeah, we did that, but it was not a real pleasant operation.
One thing Craig forgot about the orchard, his father probably had the first cherry shaker in Door County, but it was like a chainsaw with an arm and shook each branch separately. So your arms went like this, all over, hanging on all these branches. It was the worst machine you ever saw.
And then we all picked cherries there to make some money in the summer. And while a good picker, a good person that came in to pick could do 100 pails a day, I think we got close to that, I suppose. We probably did 4 or 5, and then 8, 4 or 5. And then we would load up the truck, and Bill always got this truck from Lambert Yards that was flatbed. And we'd load them all up, and at that time we took them out to, we're going garbages now, that's where we dropped them off. So we'd sit on the back of this truck, which didn't have any sides on it at all, and on the way back, and again, I think his middle name was Lynn, invented this game, where we would go up by the front of the cab, and Bill would be driving back, and the object was to jump as high as you could and land as close to the back of the truck as while we were going, back to the orchard. One of the other areas that we always seem to find ourselves at was at Mann's store. You saw the picture of it there. Chet Mann sold bait and had a shoe repair shop. But that's where we had our sledding hill. Steve is here somewhere. And we had our sledding hill there. And you had to be very careful. It always kind of reminded me of that scene in It's a Wonderful Life. Because if you got too far, you were down in the swamp, or you could run into the minnow pit down there. But we were there all the time. And there some of the most wild concoctions took place. We had a postmaster, Philip Burns, lifetime resident here, and Phil in the wintertime would put a little wooden thing in his window to protect him so it wasn't so cold while he delivered mail. And one of the guys on the table up here decided it was a good idea to put a cat in the mailbox. We'd wait until Philip came along, and then the cat would jump through that little square and run all the way around the car a couple times.
No, that's very important. We put it in his mailbox, his own mailbox. So he opened his own mailboxes when the cat came out, and we were all on top of the co-op both watching.
We would spend a lot of time back behind. We would go up on the bluffs where the Sister Bay condos are now. We'd go up those bluffs, and if you see from the water, there was a big cave. It was a nice opening, and we'd sit up there and we'd enjoy the day or whatever. But what most people don't know is on the way to that cave, there was another cave. And the cave is actually pretty big, but you have to know where to look for it, you have to find it, and you have to work your way into the first hole, and then it kind of goes down, and goes back up. And it was probably big enough for 3 or 4 of us. We would sit in there, and we spent a lot of time in that cave. And now, of course, because it's not accessible to the public, it may be abandoned. And I believe that someday it'll be found again, and somebody will say, oh my gosh, the Ojibwa, and I look at early magazines and found it. The other spent a lot of time at was outside of Sister Bay. As we got a little older, we go to the drive-in movie.
Yeah.
And the drive-in movie at that time involved generally stopping and eat from, and having most of the people in the car get into the trunk. So we always want to bring Bastian's car because Dorothy loved a big car. And what was your car generally? You had the
It was a Mercury Marquis.
Mercury Marquis. And one night, 4 of us jumped into, we were maybe a little smaller at the time. Barney Williams was in there. And we headed to the drive-in. And now it's a little bit unusual to see on a Friday night one 16-year-old boy. But on this particular occasion, he's talking to us from the front and he's going, 3 more cars, 2 more cars. And at about 2 more cars, Barney cut loose with the most god-awful fart. And we were dying in there. And the car was going like this. And stop! It looked like a lowrider. And he was trying to pay like this. And we got in, and it wasn't long, and we heard the knock on the trunk. There was Orville Bates. You guys come out here! We often did things as a group. And one night, the 4 of us, Fuzzy, Fuzzy, what was your? Can you pass it over? So we'll start with Zeb on this. Your first car, Zeb. Your first car.
I think it was a Corvair, a Chevy Corvair, 2-door.
All right. And David?
1961 Mercury Comet.
Oh, I think I spent some time there. Fuzzy?
It's across the street over here.
The 38 Chevy. And I can tell you that if you flip open the little latch in here, it fits a pony barrel right in there. Hoses come off of it. But anyway, this night we were not in his 38. We were in his parents' car and we were going somewhere and somebody, and I think David, you didn't own up to it, but I believe the other guy said, toss a snowball at Craig. He ducked his head and caught his, right above the eye on the corner of the door, and it opened it up pretty good. So we jumped in the car and we headed up to Doc Farmer's, so it was just outside of Sister Bay, and Doc Farmer was in bed. And his wife went and got him, and he came on shuffling in his slippers and his robe. Yeah, I opened it up pretty good there, didn't you? And so he went to the sink and got the Dawn dishwasher, and came over and he said to these guys, you better put your hands on his shoulders and his arms. This is going to sting a little bit. Never pulled out any anesthetic, just that long thread, and Craig was not happy as he stitched that thing up.
One other little statement you forgot about when we first got there was wife. He goes, Margaret, get out the sailor. We got a little soul job.
And also he reeked of bourbon.
I talked about our first cars, but Fuzzy also had access to a pickup truck early on. And I just have to ask, what was your infatuation with outhouses? Fuzzy Sunstrom and Gene Sunstrom moved more outhouses in this town, and a good number of them ended up on my front porch. Nailed, busted, there was always an outhouse on the back of one of your trucks. And then you guys, I could hear you giggling on your way out of town. But we moved a lot of outhouses. And one night, David, why don't you tell this story? One night, I don't know whose truck we were in, but we decided to put an outhouse on top of the high school.
I think there were a couple of carloads of people at Koessl. Can you hear me now? Okay. I think there were a couple of carloads of kids that were on this exercise, and we got it on the truck, we got it to the high school, we got it close to the front door, and all of a sudden the police came. And we all, well, it was, I think we did this about 2 or 3 times, so I'm trying to get it straightened out. But we all ran, and they ended up, the officer ended up just parking on the other side of the road and just started calling our names. And they knew who it was. And so we were all guilty and caught. But good thing is nobody ever got hurt.
That's right. Well, you did that night a little bit, as you hit the tree.
I was just told my side of the story this morning, and we were up on the roof of the school. Somehow we thought we were going to be able to get the outhouse up there. And when the cop pulled in, I saw it, and I ran for the end of the school, and there were some big cedar trees on the end. And I felt that if I dove at that and I could wrap my legs around it, I could just fine. I could climb, or I could slide down the thing and get off. Well, my legs went up in the air like this. Instead of, I caught the top, my legs went up, and the top of the tree broke off. And just lost my air for a little bit, but luckily didn't get hurt.
Dick, can I have one quick outhouse story? A different Halloween, but same kind of outhouse story. It was David, me, Barney, and Dan Erickson. And it was late at night, and we were kind of just horsing around, and we came upon an outhouse by the sister-based school, and we thought it would be cool to roll it down to the intersection where 42 meets 57. So we proceeded to do that, the 4 of us. We saw a car coming around the corner, probably by where the Voyager Inn or the Patio Drive-In were, and we thought, that's got to be a cop. David, Barney, and I ran up on the bluff, kind of hit ourselves. Dan, his sister is here somewhere, Donna. Dan decided the smart thing to do was to crawl into the outhouse through the hole that, you know what hole I'm talking about. So anyway, the 3 of us are up in the woods, and we could hear the cop going, "Come on guys, we know who you are." Well, Dan was a good guy. He didn't snitch, because we were going, they're not saying any names, so they probably don't know who we are. So we ended up going down to my parents' place, which was right before, right at the other side of the bluff. We went home, and everything was fine. The next morning, David came riding into our driveway with his dad, Jake, and Jake just goes. So yeah, we got caught.
I think Dick forgot part of the story too, and I'm not sure if it was this trip or the next trip. But why don't you tell them about, you were able to wake up all day at night.
Yeah, the night that the outhouse was on the roof, and Mr. Gully, a southern police officer, came around the corner and yelled, "Stop or I'll shoot!" Back then, we believed that they would. So he put 5 of us in the car. I kind of gave myself up because I thought it looked like a good time. What Barney kept saying, "It's not a big deal, it's Dick's outhouse." And I said, "No, no." Barney was in the back seat, and I was in the front seat with with Gully and another guy. And he said, "We're going to Bowley's house." I said, "You're not going to see this. It's too loud." "We're going to Bowley's house. No, we're going to Bowley's house." And so he took us to Bowley's house, and he owned the Village Green Hotel at that time. And as blazed in my memory, he came out in a V-neck T-shirt and boxer shorts with his angry look on his face, and he opened the door, and I was the first one there, so I went onto the ground, eat the chicken for a little while, and the girl goes, "Jillian!" And next time I'll bring our parents over there and apologize. So, yeah. But that was a pretty standard run, that outhouse thing. Outhouses around the house anywhere? Going back a little ways, when we started school, I had a hip issue. My mother had peripheries. Supposedly, it's a situation where your hip doesn't form over the joint. And they said it wasn't contagious. Hereditary. But I had it, and my son Justin had it. So I think they're probably wrong there. But in my case, they started when I was in first grade, by strapping my leg up in a harness, and I learned to be pretty fast on crutches. And then shortly thereafter, I did some damage to my right leg because of the amount of run on that. And so they put me in a wheelchair. So for a period of about 1.5 years or 2, I was either on crutches or in a chair. And I'll tell you what, the friends are good. Great, thank you. I don't really ever had a fuzzy. Were wheeling me around, lifting me around for 2 years. Didn't miss a beat in friendship. I was just part of the group.
You're welcome.
In addition, we had another friend who wasn't as fortunate as I was. Louis Michael Hansen was a friend of ours who at a young age, I guess he may have been born with it. Remember the disease, Craig? Cystic fibrosis. And Louis was, of course, a relative of Belch and Barney, his mother, was your father's sister, correct?
Yes.
So Louis, here was a guy who spent a lot of time studying. They poured it in a little box in our classroom, and we were able to talk to Louis because he could not come to class. But Craig, I think first, and then Greg and myself became good friends with Louis. And we would go to his house to sleep, and the boy, knew more about baseball than anyone. I mean, you could say something like, the 64 World Series, who played third base for the Dodgers? Well, he said after the second game, because it became this person with an injury, and he was just crazy guy. So we go to his house and we play basketball with roll-up socks, and then he'd go to bed in this tent. And every night when he went to bed, he'd wake up in this terrible coughing fit, and his parents would have to come in and pound on his back and his chest until he was relieved. But at a very young age, and I think we were in 8th grade, possibly freshman, Louis died. And we had been friends for a long time, and I think for the most of us, it was probably the first time we lost a friend. And I remember being put in a little suit and shiny shoes and walking down to the funeral home. And I was just talking to Greg Casperson about this because it seemed like they always had wakes on a Friday night, and then the people would go to the wake, and then they'd go to Al Johnson's to eat because they were open until 9, and then they'd go to the Red Owl and do their shopping for the week. But I think there are some bonds that are formed by heartbreak and tragedy, and losing Louis was one of them. Unfortunately, they weren't the only ones we lost over time, but that was our first. Right? When I was young, we had a bowling league. Barney had one, Tommy Staver had one, and Fuzzy had one. And if you didn't show up for the bowling day, you got 100 pins, times 300 pins for that night. I was never very good. Fuzzy used to give me a quarter to stay home. And on South Spring Road, we had an area called Tarzan Land with all of the low-hanging vines. And we spent more time in Tarzan Land, where we would go for adventure, and we'd become Tarzan, and we'd have a great time. I wanted to talk a little bit about your first job, and a job that you really loved. Fuzzy, can we start with you?
My first job was for the Kramers at Carol's Corral and on the farm. I just tell you a funny story. I was 12 years old. My first week at work, Willard taught me how to drive a stick shift that didn't have a clutch. And I drove it once out around the field. He says, "Do you know how to get to the old dump?" Where the old dump was out on ZZ. I said, "Yeah, I know how to get there." Okay. We loaded up the back of the station wagon with hay, and the top we tied on hay, and I started driving steady back and forth at 12 years old. And then I used to help spring break horses before the good little girls came to take the rides out in the summer. I got to do that, and I helped him with his charities. Then I worked nights at the bowl as a busser. So that was my first two jobs.
And the favorite one you had?
I would say it was Kramer's, because I was doing everything. I was farming one day, the next day you'd be helping Dusty with something down with a patio restaurant. Then it was at the horse stable. It was a great job.
My first job was, first jobs, I guess, where I was mowing lawns and helping people with their yards. And I started at about 11 and did a professor's yard down in Ypres, and then did a couple more around our home on the beach road. So it was a good start.
Unlike these two, I waited until I was 14 and legal to work. Farm was legal at 12. My first job was for Herman Steve at Happy Herman's grocery store. It was great. It was Steve Jacobson worked there at the time. I think he was a young butcher. And Kita, and I think it was basically just us, but it was a great job.
You know, the people,
They want yours.
my first job was at the Red Owl store. I went to work at the Red Owl store with Chris, and was taught, I think, a pretty good work ethic there. I worked for them for a couple years, and then went to Bechet's. Loved working at Bechet's. Your mother was an unbelievable woman. I mean, she loved her. She loved her. For all that you put her through, you should. And then she was a good mother. And made a great, great pie. And then I went to L. Johnson's until I picked up the job and I spent my career.
Do you do your Al Johnson impersonations?
I don't do an Al Johnson. No, that's a whole other night. One of the things that I remember about growing up is I think all of us were in Little League with Bill Bastian. All of us probably were in Boy Scouts. David, were you in Boy Scouts? Yeah, with Bill Bastian and then Gentry on trips to Bear Paw. We spent time at Bear Paw. And Kai Fletcher was there. He was great. He helped a lot. And what you probably don't know is I think at least two of us, maybe more, were in 4-H with Bernice Sunstrom and Helen Burress. It was not unusual for the boys to take 4-H, and we learned to sew, we learned to cook, and we learned to can, and we learned to do a whole bunch of things that I think has helped us later in life. So those are good memories, and we all had great folks to help us along the way. We are going to do something just a little different. I want to get through some of these because we're going to ask if you have, we only have a little time for questions if anybody has some. But this next is a little lightning round of questions that we're going to see who gets the most answers. There's just 16 questions. All right, let's try them to see if they all work. So the first one to ring in gets to answer the question. If you're incorrect, you lose 2 points. What was the nickname of the man who ran the feed mill? Leslie's first.
Peanuts.
Peanuts Larson. We don't have any 10-point bonus questions. What was the Peanuts' real name?
Ken.
Ken, all right. What was the name of the card game we played at Harry's?
No hand talk, or no peek, one hand talk.
It was Tom. And Craig got that one right. That's Craig.
Harry had one arm.
So, and that's the follow-up question. Was Harry right or left-handed? It's left-handed. You got that. You didn't ring the bell. Okay.
Which arm did he have?
In 7th grade, we were bused to Fish Creek to newly created junior high. We were the first ones. Who were the 4 teachers that taught there? Craig.
Gordy Brand, Mrs. Anthony, Roy Lucas, and Hulda Hafer.
Hey! All right, this next question we should all know. Who is infamous or famous for his almost perfect belly flop off the stack of logs at Burns Brothers? David.
Koessl.
Koessl. I thought we killed him. What was the name of the game that we played at the beach, which required a popsicle stick? Bibble Babble. A couple times we've heard that, right? This next one. Gentry, Chet, Chomsky Bear, Speck could often be found where playing what? David.
Busby's, Schmear.
Busby's playing Schmear. David. The next one. Who did we go to when we wanted to get the key to the village hall? Craig Bastian.
My dad.
Second to Dan knows. Archie was there. What did we often cook over an open fire at the beach?
Crayfish.
Crayfish. In the late 60s, what did the following bars have in common? The Parkway, Harry's, Rosie's. Yes.
18-year-old bars.
Diaper Inns, 18-year-old bars. And that meant you could get beer at 14. What was the name of the ice cream and root beer float at Husby's Call? Black Cow.
What?
What soda was advertised in the billboard on the side of Husby's for years? Craig.
Orange Crush.
Orange Crush. And second to that was Bubble. And finally, what was the name of the dance hall behind Master Freeze in the late 60s?
Green Gorilla.
Green Gorilla. That was I think Craig wins the lightning round. All right, I'm going to, in a moment, open it to some questions, but I just want to say that I often hear people tell us how unusual it is that you've had friendships that have lasted over a period of years, and that we've lived in such a wonderful place that it's fabulous. So I would ask you, what do you attribute to lasting friendships? David, do you want to start?
Well, with us here, the character of the people that we're talking with right now, and just the great families that they came from, and just the quality of the people that we spend our time with over our lives.
Craig?
Yeah, we're all good people who just love each other. We've known each other forever, and the one thing that really helps is Mr. Kodanko here, when he comes up, he's kind of like the magnet that gets us all together. I mean, Greg and Dick and I and Andy, we all see each other. But when Dave comes to town, it doesn't force it in the sense of the word, but it allows us all, we get together as kind of a family. So we appreciate you coming.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. It's just, we've always just been together. When you're out, you see the other one, you just sort of slide over that way and you get together and do things. Craig, Dick, and I do have coffee together almost every Saturday. So it keeps our friendship very possible.
And I guess the only thing I would add is politicians have stole this one from us, but when they talk about it takes a village, I mean, there is not every one of your fathers or mothers have scolded me at some point. They've all participated in my life, as so many others here have. And I just think we did have a wonderful place. I'm not suggesting it's not anymore, but it was a different place and time, and we had an opportunity to live in a community. We would head out of the house with a wave or a goodbye to our parents, and there was very little questions about where we were going or what was happening. And that was even at a young age. We just would be home for lunch and dinner, and we were protected by our neighbors and the people that lived in our community. It was a great community, and we all appreciate it very much. At this point, I would like to, Lizzie, yes.
I'd like couple minutes here. I've got a few things. We touched on a lot of things, but a few things we didn't touch on enough, I don't think. Burns Brothers and the co-op. Burns Brothers, behind the co-op was this trees that we was talking about, this bluff. They let us build 6 or 7 tree houses on their property. All the kids, we do everything, and this is where Barky comes in again. Barky worked at the lumberyard. He'd say, "What are you guys doing today?" "Well, we're putting boards on." Then he'd grab a handful of 8-pennies. They had the old ring with all the nails in it. Take a handful of 8-pennies, throw on the floor. "You boys should sweep the floor today." And we'd have the nails we need for the building. The next day it might be 16 pennies, or we might need shingles. They were so great to us. They let us build rafts with the logs that were too small to saw in their sawmill. And they let us have the logs, rafts on the beach all summer. We kept boats at their dock. And the co-op, they let us take all their feed bags and make forts on them. Pack them wherever we wanted in there, make forts. And it was a nickel a piece if you shot mice over them. So we had a lot of things. And then one other thing we didn't really stretch about or talk about was the village hall and all of its uses. You know, very few people remember we had an archery range down there. We were taught to shoot archery in that village hall basement. Like they talked about the pancakes and everything else. We had a venison feed there every year by the finance club. Or Legion, that was Legion, venison feed. But there was just so much going on there. And with the fall festival, we had kids parade. All the kids took their bicycles and we put the baseball cards with clothespins. So they clicked down, we went down the road, made noise, and dressed them all up. And every business, there wasn't a box, there was a box at every business gave out a prize for the fall festival. So every single business you went in and registered if you wanted to win their prize. And you talked about bowling a little bit. Earl, it was 10 games for $1 on Saturdays. Across the bowl. Yep, 10 games for $1, and that's when we had a league going. But that's just a few other, just so many things that kept us all busy and active. And the best thing, we didn't have cell phones. We called our friends.
For as much time as they allowed us to spend at Burns Brothers, you know, we didn't always make the best decisions either. There was one building that was just for wood shavings as they cut the logs. That's where we would go to smoke. You know, we were always literally fishing for something. There was a sucker season and a smelt season, and when the smelts were running heavy when they ran, and we'd get buckets full, and then at 2 in the morning we'd go over and wake Bernice up, Fuzzy's mother, and she'd start the line, and there'd be somebody that'd cut the head off, and somebody that'd cut the and we'd clean the smelt, and then she'd fry them up, and we'd get down about 5 in the morning, full of smelt and happy. Suckers were another story. There was a time when I lived in an apartment, and I went out to help my buddy Roy Elquist and Fuzzy pick some nets. They had a fishing fishing license, and we got out there. He said it should be an hour or two, and we got out and started pulling the nets, and they were full of suckers. Well, this was Halloween, and I had had my costume ready for the party over in Bailey's Harbor. I was going to be Elton John. I was little Tic Tac glasses with fish swimming in colored water. And so after about 2 hours, Roy said, well, this isn't working. We're going to pull the nets on shore. So we'll pull the nets and we'll pick them on shore. So we got to shore and we picked for another hour or so. And I said, I didn't sign up for this. I'm heading for the party. So I got home a little late that night and I walked into my kitchen and there is a smelt in my frying pan, a sucker roast, big old sucker. And I went into the bathroom and there in the toilet looking up at me. And then were 2 suckers. And everywhere I looked for the next 3 days, there was a sucker. You never want to trick this guy because there's always one coming behind. All right, is there any questions? Is there any questions or comments? Comments are fine too, yes.
Craig, how long did you play in the Door County Baseball League?
12 years.
And why did you play for Bailey's Harbor?
Simple answer to that, because Sister May had a young pitcher by the name of Paul Warfel, who was 2 to 3 years older than me, and he wasn't going anywhere. So, and Bailey's Harbor had a lot of good friends, and they needed a pitcher. So it was just simply that reason. I went on the bench at Sister May.
How did the grudge start?
I truly don't know. I don't have an answer for you on that, Bill. I don't know. Back in the day, well, Sister May always thought Bailey's Harbor was her farm system.
Bill, you didn't ask the important questions. Ask him how many times he hit me when I was batting. Almost every game.
Terry.
Dick, tell us about your first date with Jane.
Well,
Where did you go?
we went I took her to the Forest Villa for a dance, which is a nightclub in Forestville. And I had a little blue MG and we shot down there and danced the night away and it was quite an evening. Any other comments? We would like to really thank you. We've had a fun night. Yes.
I thought it was interesting you never talked about school. Did you go to school?
And it was our job to plan the parties.
We all graduated.
Anything else? If not, yes.
How did you start working for the ambulance service?
How did I start working for the ambulance services? I actually tried to get into the Navy as a corpsman after school, but my hip prevented me from doing that. So then Greg Casperson asked me to help him. They were retiring in the service at that time, and a lot of them were moving to countywide services. And the county decided to take over the service, and Baldy Bridenhagen was responsible to it. And he came to me and asked if I would consider being one of the people on the squad. And I had been on the squad with Kais Fletcher and Greg Casperson's son, so I thought I liked it, but I was scheduled to go to UWM that fall. So I went to Al Johnson and I asked him, I said, what do you think I should do? And Al said, try it. You can always go to school. Sometimes plans change, and so that's how it started. I was there the night that Susie and Fuzzy, and I think Fuzzy was scheduled to go to Stevens Point for industrial arts, if that's correct, and was offered a career, and sometimes you never know what happened, but he's been a most successful businessman in Sister Bay, and I think it worked out for him and worked out for me. Life is funny. Craig.
Just a side note on the Gene's question to Dick. I'll be real brief here, but in high school, the three of us were athletes. Fuzzy and I played baseball, basketball, football. David played football, track. And through all of that, Dick was part of it. But Dick, with his aforementioned problems with his hip, he wasn't real athletic. But he was always part of the team, and he would be taping ankles and doing all that stuff So I think, Greg, you would agree when we found out Dick went into the field that he went into, we weren't surprised at all. I mean, he'd been doing it his whole life. Yes, Paul.
Who started this soapbox derby?
Oh gosh, soapbox derby was started by the Lions Club many years ago, and it was just kind of a responsibility of them at the time. And it's been continued, of course, by Mr. Fuzzy Sunstrom. Fuzzy, anything to add there?
Well, yeah, I think that people should know that the original soapbox derby, when it was held, started at Husby's, and the ramp was 4 feet high. Yes, and I actually, my brother and I both raced off of that ramp. When it originally started, then it stopped. And then when our kids were little, I brought it back again. And we had it for about 8 or 10 years there, and then we had an accident. And because of insurance purposes, it got dropped. So when we restarted it now, we lowered it even more down the hill and went further. So it's a slower race, but about the same distance.
That hill is actually pretty tall. When you're driving up the hill with a little MG, and bowling balls are coming rolling down. Another story for Johnny Sawyer.
Dick, the answer by all four. Just the object, what did you roll down the Sister Bay Hill?
I just rolled myself.
Not sure about that, but we should talk about what rolled off the bowl's roof during the ping pong drop. A carton of eggs fits in your hand like this, and when the ping pong balls are coming down, you kind of go like
Well, again, we would really like to thank you for coming, and just conclude by saying we lived in a small town, and probably would die in a small town.